Welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa Alastuey, and on this channel, you will find a variety of inspirational and informational videos. So if that sounds good to you and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. My guest today is Dr. John Morrison, who holds a PhD in educational leadership. He is an educator, life coach, and digital creator whose content is centered on philosophy, psychology, intrapersonal intelligence, and personal development. I will be linking his social media accounts in the description box for your reference. Welcome, Dr. Morrison.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on here today. So could you just share a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I chose public education as my career path, but I didn't choose that necessarily during my bachelor's degree. While I was getting my bachelor's, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that I liked history and I knew that I liked religion. At the time, I was actually a youth pastor with the Assemblies of God denomination. I've since moved away from that. So my undergraduate was a combination of history and religion, but I got alternatively certified to teach history, English, and math at the K-12 level. And so while I was doing that, I knew I wanted to kind of continue my education. I always had a PhD on my bucket list. And so I liked teaching. I liked the education space. So I decided to move forward with a master's degree in educational leadership from the University of Oklahoma. And then while I was getting that, I had a professor recruit me to the PhD program in the same field and same area, educational leadership. And so I was her graduate assistant during that time. And while I was doing that, I was doing different, roles in the background. I was a teacher in a brick and mortar setting. I was a teacher in the virtual setting. I then started moving up the ranks a little bit when I became an instructional coach. And then I was a testing director. And then I helped found a different virtual program with the brick and mortar district. I was a principal. I was an adjunct professor. And then recently I was a director of product vision at an ed tech startup near where I live here. I did that for around 8 months or so, and then decided to kind of head back to public education. And so right now I'm back in the classroom, just hanging out with kids for now, just waiting to see what maybe next year or the year after brings. Just kind of open to opportunities at this point.
Oh, that's so awesome. You have a very varied background, but all in the educational realm, which I think is quite interesting. So I found you originally via your TickTock account, which I find very informative because you talk a lot on there about Stoicism, which is one of my favorite philosophies. And so can you just kind of share with us why you started a TickTock account and really focusing on things like the Socratic way?
Sure. So in the background of my profession, I've always had different sorts of hobbies and things that I was interested in, and I'm a big reader. I read a book and a half a week at this point, and a lot of what I've been reading for the last 5 or 6 years has been in the realm of philosophy. I don't read a lot of novels. I read a lot of practical application sorts of books, like leadership books and just different things like that. But once I found Ryan Holiday and a lot of the text from the Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, namely, that was it for me. Like that, I decided to sell out in terms of like how I should live and how I should approach various things on my day to day. Because I found that I was someone that worried a little bit too much or worried more than I wanted to. And I was a bit quicker to anger than I wanted to be. And if you look at the Stoic text and a lot of what they talk about, it's like, you don't necessarily need to get all worked up over all these things that are outside of your control. And you don't necessarily need to get angry about, such small things. And so once I started like fully adopting that in my own lifestyle, and I realized that it was kind of helping others. And I noticed this whenever I was an instructional coach. So as I was talking to teachers, I think I did that for 3.5 years. While I was working with these teachers, I was hearing them say different things that were frustrating them and different things that were kind of distracting them from doing the best job that they can do. And a lot of it pertained to things that were outside of their control. And it came down to where not only was I coaching them instructionally, helping them, teach better, I was kind of talking to them about different things in their lives that if they were to just like reshift their focus or recenter what matters most to them, then all these other things might fall into place, if that makes sense. So I was just dabbling with it in the background while I was an instructional coach, and then it became a part of who I am now. And so my TikTok account, I have this desire, this burning desire to help as many people as possible. And if you don't have the internet, then the only people that you can really help are those that are in your immediate sphere of influence, just the people that you can talk to on a daily basis, and your sphere of influence that way is somewhat limited. Whereas if you're online, like what you're doing here, and what you're doing on your TikTok as well, is opening up an opportunity to reach thousands or millions of people with a message of hope, of perseverance, of grit, of just different ways to think about how they're living, and encourage them to reconsider things that they think are more important than they actually are. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I love primarily, because you are an encourager. You focus a lot in your channel in encouraging people. And can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that there is an encouragement gap in our society. We have people that will complain and tell you what they don't like. And we just don't have enough in encouragement in our personal and in our professional lives.
Right. Yeah, so I mentioned this in yesterday's TikTok that people are really struggling right now, and like the world is basically in need of more lighthouses. I not to get too kind of weird, but I did have a dream like a couple of years ago where there was this like there's like this Japanese monk that was speaking to me, and he suggested that like in your path is much like a light. Like what you are going to do is kind of shine a light into a bunch of different people's lives. And I'm not necessarily a religious person or even a spiritual person, but that dream really hit me, and that symbol of a lighthouse has really stayed with me. And I think right now with everything that's been going on since 2020, health wise and whatnot with COVID, and then everything that's been going on in America since 2015 and 2016 in the political landscape, people are very, very like concerned and stressed and frustrated, and it's getting to the point where people aren't necessarily thinking too much about other people. They're mostly just thinking about themselves, and we're becoming a little bit more self-centric than we should be. And so if we have an opportunity like you and I do to potentially encourage people and let them know that they are not alone in their frustrations, and that there are people that care about them, and that there are ways out of the frustrations that they've put themselves into, then we can potentially guide them or help guide them along the way. And so when you look at my TikTok, if you look at some of the themes that I cover in my videos, like today we looked at anger. I looked at anger and trust. And anger, whenever I post videos about anger, that's when people really go after me in the comments, I've noticed. Like if you go back through all my videos, the anger videos are the ones that tend to go the most viral, and the ones that typically end up having like a debate or a discussion in the comments, because there are people that want to defend their anger, or they want to be angry, and they like being angry because they feel like they're in control, because we've all felt so out of control for so long, right? And so what I'm saying is, like, what, you might feel out of control, and it might make you want to be angry, but there are different ways that you can be in control in other areas of your life. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get people to think about why they think the way they think, get them to think about why they believe what they believe, get them to think about why they're saying the things they're saying, and why they're doing the things they're doing. Let's just examine our lives and identify what is really going on and why I feel the way I feel today.
Yeah, you really are asking people to critically think, and you're giving hopefully some skills along those lines, because maybe they didn't get it at home, they didn't get it in the school, and so they've just adopted a lazy way of approaching things, and just letting others think for them and decide for them. And so I love that you are challenging and motivating people to really take some ownership in their own thoughts and ideas and decisions and consequences and so on.
Yeah. I think that too many of us are living on autopilot, and we don't. For me, I think people they want to live however they want to live, and that's totally fine. That's totally great. But if you are not aware of a better way to live, or at least a healthier way to live, or a way to live that might bring about the positive change that your sphere of influence needs from you, or even if you have potential that you feel like you can't tap, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to pull this out of as many people as I can, to get them to think about why they're in the situation they're in. And oftentimes, whenever you're trying to help people, you're kind of poking at them a little bit. And a lot of times people don't like to be poked. And
Mhm.
that's when they get a little defensive, and the anger that they might already have about something else, they then unleash it in comment sections on the online.
Yeah, because you're asking them to kind of face,
Yeah,
maybe some demons or face some truths that they don't want to look at.
yeah,
But it's all part of the healing process, and people will stay stuck if they don't.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the worst that can happen is that you just realize what's going on in your life. If you don't want to change it, that's fine. But
Hmm.
like examine it and identify exactly why you're in the situation you're in, and then consider, is this a place that I want to be in my life? And if it
Hmm.
is a place that you want to stay stuck in,
Hmm.
if your diet's not where you want it to be, if your marriage is not where you want it to be, if your relationship with your kids is not where you want it, not where you want it to be, then there are steps that you can follow to get those things out. Go
Hmm.
on this direction. But if they are where you want them to be, just be okay with it. Just know who you are. You know,
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
in your truth.
Absolutely. I think, we have such a toxic culture. There's so many things at play in our culture that work against us and work against our authenticity, work against our just our peace. And so a lot of things, like I tell, my own students, is that they should go counter culture. Don't buy what the culture is always selling you, because a lot of things in our culture is toxic and unhealthy, and
Mhm.
um, it can be like a prison and hard to get out of if you don't see it clearly.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, from what I've noticed with my colleagues, I live in Oklahoma. I don't know if you mentioned that in the introduction, but our state is very how should I say this in a considerate way? There is an understanding in our state that public education isn't necessarily as important as it could be. If that makes sense. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to be careful. So many of my colleagues feel like there's no way out. They feel like this is where they belong. This is what they're going to do, and they're just going to deal with the situation that's arising around them in the state, right? And so they feel powerless, they feel helpless, they feel like their voice doesn't matter, they feel like they can't do anything, they feel like everything's out of their control, right? And much of that is true. And if it is true, and since it is true, some of that stuff you don't necessarily need to get as frustrated about, or you don't necessarily need to let that keep you up at night. And you just need to determine, is this the path that you want to stay on? Do you want to stay a public teacher, a public education professional in a state that is kind of leaning against you? And it's just a conversation they need to have, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they won't even think about it, and they just like go home and just deal with it. And that's not necessarily how we should live.
Mm-hmm.
Don't trap yourself, like you said. Don't trap yourself in something that you feel like you need to be in for 40 years, and then at the end of your life regret every decision that you did not make.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We are having a teacher shortage for a reason, and I'm hoping people are paying attention to that. We're losing lots of great teachers. They're going into other fields where they do feel valued. And so for those that are still in the trenches, like yourself, like, bless you for what you do every day, because it's not an easy job. Obviously, if it was, I mean, more people would be, doing it. But yeah, most definitely. So
Yeah.
can we talk about some encouragement for some intrapersonal challenges? I know you focus on a lot of those. Could you maybe tell me some intrapersonal challenges, like examples that you work with people a lot with?
Sure. Yeah. So just so that we're clear, I do work with people on the side.
Mhm.
My
Life
9 to 5
coach.
is with kids and whatnot, but like I do work with adults on the side. So I decided to. So when you look at emotional intelligence, there are 4 different domains. Okay, there's self-awareness, there's self-management, there's social awareness, and then there's relationship management. Those are kind of like the 4 domains, pillars of emotional intelligence. And then underneath each one of those pillars is like a dozen other things, right? The first 2, self-awareness and self-management, are within the interpersonal intelligence kind of field or area.
Mhm.
And what I've decided to do for my end, I've decided to go after that, because I have a theory that if you can work on yourself and get yourself in a good place, you then are going to infect everyone around you and make a bigger change than if you're just going right at somebody, right?
Yep.
So if you notice in my TikToks, I'll often just kind of talk about myself out loud, or I'll just say, have you ever been in this sort of situation, right? Instead of me just saying straight up, don't do this or go do this. It's
Mhm.
just think about yourself and then see if you're in a similar situation. If you are, how are you handling it, right?
Mhm.
So intrapersonal intelligence, the INTRA one, is all about yourself and inside. So for me, there are several different things that I've noticed with students, with adults, with the people I work with, that really get in the way of potential. And as I mentioned earlier, anger is a big one. Anger, hopelessness, frustration over them not being where they want to be in their life, things like that. And so what I try to always do is bring it back to the Stoic kind of approach to things. And if you really want to sum Stoicism up into kind of like one idea, it's you don't necessarily what is in your control and what is not in your control, right?
Mhm.
And if you focus more on the things that are in your control, you are in more control of your life. But if you focus on the things that you're not in control, then you don't have as much control, right? And so when I work with adults, that's what I try to do. I try to recenter it all back. And
Mhm.
whenever they're sharing their frustrations with me, either via email or in conversations about this or that, the first question we always ask is there anything that you can do about this right now? Is there anything that could have been that you could have done differently to prevent it from getting to this point? Right. We ask key questions to recenter it back to them and to find out if there was some like measure of responsibility on their part that got them there, and if there's some like ironing out that they need to do on their end to amend it, right? And oftentimes, and this is a long way around answering your question. Oftentimes, what I find the most is that people are most frustrated about two things. One, like I said, things they just cannot control that are just happening around them and they feel hopeless, right? And then
Mhm.
two is unfulfilled potential or unfulfilled goals. So when they wanted to do something by 30 and they didn't do it, it really puts them in this spiral of depression or whatever. Or they wanted to get promoted and they didn't get promoted this year and they feel like it's their fault. And we have a conversation. We go back and say, well, you didn't get promoted, but who did get promoted? Do they have more skills than you? Do they have more experience than you? Did the school need a female administrator over a male administrator? Even though it's not explicitly said in the job description or whatever. There are a bunch of different little questions that you can ask to try to get to the bottom of everything that bothers you. And I think oftentimes people don't want to ask those questions or have that internal conversation with themselves because
Mhm.
they're afraid of the answers, or they don't want to assume responsibility for an answer that might pertain to some mistake they made or some sort of thing that is their fault.
Mhm. Yeah, but that's what's so great about Stoicism, because it really helps you get over those humps or those ways of thinking, and letting go of things that are out of your control, like you mentioned. And, the things that you can control, focus on that. And so I think that that's really cool when you're dealing with some of these challenges. So, for example, if somebody has like sickness and that's out of their control, let's say they get a cancer diagnosis or something like that. What stoicism or interpersonal encouragement would you give that person?
That's tough. So for me, there are two main phrases that are connected to Stoicism that I found that you can apply to a lot of things. One is amor fati, where you embrace your fate. You whatever comes your way, just embrace it because you're alive and you're alive right now to face it. And then two is memento mori, where it's remember that we're all going to die. We're here for a short period of time. We only have the life that's in front of us, and we want to live that the best way we can, right? And identifying what that best life looks like is our life's journey.
Mhm.
It's the whole game. It's the whole point of everything that we're doing, right? So if someone were to be diagnosed with cancer at 40 years old, conversations I would have with them would pertain to, what has your life looked like up to this point?
Mhm.
Do you feel like you've lived a full life up to right now? And if they haven't, then it's like, okay, so, do you have a certain number of months, certain number of years that they're suggesting that you have left? And if so, what are some things that would be important for you to do during that time? Right. Because if they can realize or at least think that, if I were to do those things, achieve that thing or do whatever, right, I would feel like that would be a fulfilled life. Or in my own personal definition of what a fulfilled life would be, that would be it, right? So I haven't had anyone that I've worked with that's been in that dire of a situation. But I definitely would have a conversation with them around, what a full life looks like, because you don't necessarily need to live a long time to have a full life. And I think a lot of us feel that way. It seems like a lot of us feel like we need to make it to 80
Mm-hmm.
to have a full life, but you can have a full life by 25,
Mm-hmm.
32, 41.
Yeah, most definitely. Going back to your anger one, because I think that's interesting that you get a lot of comments and people, there's a lot of anger out there, but I think a lot of anger is also a mask for depression. Like that's the underbelly of it. And people they don't want to look at that. They'd rather just stay
Right.
angry.
Right.
When you're working with clients with that particular challenge, what do you say or do with them?
Yeah. So I had a pretty good conversation with someone. She felt like, for her, she struggled with just like feeling, and I'll go into more description of this, where like she just felt like her life was on autopilot. She felt like life was happening to her instead of for her, and she felt like she didn't have control over anything. And she said that, whenever I'm angry about something, I'm angry about, political situations, or angry about how my mother's treating me or whatever, right? I feel like I feel something. I feel something in my body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I totally understood that. That makes a lot of sense. That you want to feel something, and if the only thing that you can feel right now is anger, then it makes sense that that's the direction that you're going, right? So what would happen, or do you feel like it would be good for you if we were to replace that feeling of anger with a feeling of success, or a feeling of being appreciated, or the companionship that you can have with a friend, or the feeling of having a good conversation with someone, right? And so having that conversation with her and just asking those sorts of questions, like I understand that you need to feel something because your life feels kind of bland and blank right now. But the thing that you're wanting to become addicted to, or the thing that you really want to strive towards, isn't necessarily good for your health.
Mm-hmm.
And so not judging her, and not saying that you're making tons of mistakes, but like letting her know that I'm witnessing her struggle, and then suggesting that she pivot it a little bit so that it's healthier for her, made a big difference
Mm-hmm.
in her situation. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, awesome. Another area that I see a lot of people struggle with, and especially online, is nihilism, where people are just like, nothing matters. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to get a job. This relationship doesn't matter. This, whatever. So what would the Stoics say about, if nothing matters, or thinking nothing matters?
Yeah, so that one's really tough. So if you've gone back to, I've been doing this since like January. I've been making the TikTok since January, but I've been working with adults before then. What I've decided to, I've tried to be very creative in terms of all the things that I'm pulling together. And one thing on top of Stoicism that I'm pulling in is also absurdism. So absurdism is built out of existentialism, which existentialism is built out of nihilism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we are just on a floating rock, like
Yes.
we're just here. There's the universe is refusing to tell us why we're here. There's no meaning that is just being mandated that we all like go towards or whatever. And Albert Camus is one of my favorite philosophers, and he's like the main absurdist philosopher. And if you look at what some of his texts, either The Stranger, The Plague, or The Myth of Sisyphus, you'll find that the most important thing we can do is identify our own meaning, or identify our own purpose while we're here. And my meaning and my purpose it will be a lot different than yours and then my neighbors. It'll just be different. The things that I'm wanting to concentrate on, I want them to matter to me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so a nihilist just straight up assumes blankly nothing matters at all. So why are we here? I don't need to work a job. I don't need to care about people. I don't need to have a relationship. Nothing matters. I might as well just, live on the beach and just do nothing, not provide any value to anyone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll find very quickly over the course of months, weeks, maybe even years, that life is just not going to be, it's not going to be what they actually want. I mean, it might be what they believe, but it's not going to be what they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like there's something inside all of us that is yearning for something else, yearning for some sort of thing to make all of this make sense, because it is just, it is absurd. The situation that we're all in is completely absurd. We're on a dying planet, and we're just repopulating it, and we're polluting it, and we're doing all these things, right? And all we can do really is try to find some sort of sliver of meaning while we're here. And so for me, my boulder, my hill and my boulder, which is the myth of Sisyphus, of rolling the boulder up and down the hill. Like, I don't know if I mentioned that in this talk. I don't think I mentioned it in this conversation. But the myth of Sisyphus is where, if you've heard of Sisyphus, he was the king that got damned by the gods to push this boulder up and down a hill for all of eternity, right? And so Albert Camus said that it was in the process. What if we were to imagine that in the process of Sisyphus, supposing he's supposed to hate this situation because the gods damned him to do it, he's supposed to hate it, right? But what if we were to imagine Sisyphus doing this, rolling the boulder up the hill, and then as it rolled back down, he's kind of walking down there to get it again, because he knows he has to get it again. And while he's walking down there, he's thinking to himself, you know what? They want me to hate this. They feel like there's no purpose behind this. There's no meaning behind it. And they've tried to set up a situation where I'm supposed to feel like there is no meaning to my existence for all of eternity. What if I can maybe roll this boulder up the hill faster? Or what if I can find a way to actually enjoy doing this? It does kind of suck, but like if I'm in control of how I feel about this thing, then maybe I'm kind of sticking it to the gods, basically giving the gods a middle finger, right? And so like that's my whole thing. Is like, if we're all here with no sort of purpose or no sort of meaning that anything or anyone's ever given to us, it's up to us to create it for ourselves. And in the process of us creating our own meaning and us creating our own purpose, we're giving the universe the finger. Because the universe doesn't care whether or not we live or die.
Yeah. So instead of like, if that thought ever crosses your mind, like nothing matters, replace it with everything matters. Every little thing you do matters, and to look at it that way.
Yeah. And identify the things that matter most to you, So like, I'm a bit of an introvert. I'm an INFJ in terms of Myers-Briggs or whatever. And so for me, a thing that doesn't matter to me is being on stage or being in a room full of people with everyone's attention on me, like that doesn't matter to me at all. But one of my daughters, she wants to be in drama, she wants to be in movies, she wants to be on play, everything. That's really important to her, and that's great. And I'm not going to judge her for wanting to do that. That's just not my thing, My thing is to stay in the background and potentially encourage people to go and do great things. And that means a lot to me. That's my purpose and meaning in life, is to encourage others to identify the things in their life that they like and care about, and help them find their meaning and their purpose.
Very good. Very good. So another thing I'd like to maybe touch on is with the interpersonal challenge, is like the conflicts that we have within ourselves, whether it be, trying to live up to a role, because that's what society tells us to do, or our family tells us to do. But those conversations that we have with ourselves, those intimate self-talk challenges, whether they are conflicting, they're not kind. What would you say as far as like helping people in that area?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, the only opinion that matters is your own, of yourself. That's it. It's just really it, right? And I'll be honest with you, I've been dealing with this for like the last 6 or 7 months as well. So none of us have it all figured out. So my thing is, if you looked at my career trajectory, my professional trajectory, I definitely shouldn't be in the classroom right now. I definitely should be a superintendent or a principal or an executive at some. Yeah, I should be an executive at an ed tech startup. I have 10 years of administrative experience, and I have a PhD from a top tier education university, right? But I'm in the classroom with kids, right? And so for everyone else that's looking at me, they're wondering, they could be wondering, what went wrong with John? Like, why is John
overqualified?
Yes, yeah. So why is John in the classroom? What something must have happened for him to end up where he is, because no one with a PhD and that many years of experience would choose to be in a classroom with 7th graders, right? If I fixated my mind and my thoughts on that right there, what other people are saying or what they're thinking, I would be miserable. I would be feeling like every single day I need to find some other job, or I need to find some other thing, so that these people that I don't really care about, to be honest, I don't say I don't care about them, but like, I don't care about their opinion. Yeah.
Yes.
So that these people will be happy with the situation that I'm in, that they'll be appeased with me being in some sort of leadership position because it makes sense to them. Right. That's not why we're here. We're not here for our lives to make sense to anybody else at all. we're here for us to enjoy and enjoy the time that we have, find things that matter and mean a lot to us, and sell out to those things, right?
Mhm.
So for me, like I'm willing to be in the classroom for the rest of my career, and I understand that. But I've proven over the years that two things. One, I've proven to others that I can do a really good job working directly with adults during the day. So I should be in some sort of instructional coaching or instructional administration sort of position, right? But also, two, that I'm good at it, that I like it, that I could do it well, and that a district would benefit from it. And the only reason that I care about that, and the only reason that I kind of want to do that again, is because if I can inspire and make a difference in the lives of adults, of educators that are then going to go to classrooms and work with students, my impact, even though it's indirect, my impact on kids can be exponentially bigger than what it is right now. Because right now, my impact on kids is the 125 that I see every day. Whereas if I'm working with 6 teachers that all have 125 students, it's 6 times 125 that I'm actually impacting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So my thing on that is like when you want to start going after yourself, think about who's saying that. Like, is that your voice, or is that someone else's voice that should not mean as much to you as it is, as it's currently meaning?
Yes, most definitely. So another challenge I see a lot of people struggle with is, being disappointed by other people that have let them down, that didn't keep their word or betrayed them. And people really struggle, with that and interpersonally. So what would the Stoics say, or what do you do when you're working with clients that are dealing with that?
Yeah. So if you look at, I think it's book 2 of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's early in Meditations, where he says, when you wake up today, remind yourself that you're going to meet with these people that are like deceitful, that are nagging, that complain. Just basically, you're going to meet with a bunch of people that are approaching life in a much different way than you, and just remind yourself and be ready for it.
Even like, it hurts even more when it's like a supposedly loved one or a family person, strangers, you're like, okay, they're strangers.
Yeah, it is
but
what
like,
it is. Yeah.
it hurts more when it's like somebody that maybe you trusted, or it's like I said, a family member.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I would say that Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and even Epictetus would say that, at the end of the day, people are going to do what's in their own best interest, right? And oftentimes when they do something good for you, it's because it was a mutually beneficial sort of thing, if that makes sense, right? And that's kind of like it sounds kind of negative. It sounds kind of like pessimistic or whatever, but it's hard to argue against. We're all kind of thinking about ourselves 95 to 98% of the time during our waking hours, right? And many of us that do that, we also try to think about, okay, so how can I do something that's good for me today that I can also do for someone else? Because there are a lot of people like you and I that are reading the same stuff, that are watching the same videos, that are like really digging into like motivation culture and inspiration culture, that are just keeping it to themselves. So like they're bringing it all in and they're just thinking about how they can apply it to their own life. Whereas you and I, when we read something or we watch videos or we go to a conference or whatever, we're immediately thinking about how can I use this to infect or to affect and potentially inspire other people, right? And not everyone's doing that. So that's how I kind of think about the whole thing. So whenever I'm disappointed by a best friend or whatever, I just kind of take a step back and say, all right, so what angle did he take in this situation that made him say what he just said or made him do what he just did, right? And if I were in his shoes, would I have done the same thing? And often it's yes, but often it's no. And whenever it's no, it's just a matter of, okay, so I wouldn't do that, but he did, so we're different in that regard. And then I kind of measure it. Is this something that's going to really affect our friendship or affect our relationship for longer than right now? Because if it is going to affect our relationship for weeks or months, we need to talk about it right now and get to the bottom of it. But if it's very minimal and I know I'm not going to harbor resentment for them for making that small mistake, or not even a mistake, but just saying or doing that thing, and I know I'm not going to harbor resentment, I just move on. It's just, there's so many things that just aren't as important as we build them up to be.
Right, right. Very true. But also if it is like major, you might want to cut ties,
Oh,
for
yeah.
your own peace as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the Stoics aren't afraid of that. And personally, I'm not afraid of it either. My circle, I mentioned this in either yesterday's TikTok or 2 days ago. having a very small, tight circle of friends. I basically asked the question, do you make friends easily? And the subtext of my answer was no. It takes a while for me to make a friend. It's easy to make acquaintances. Like, I feel like you and I are good already. We've only known each other for about an hour or so.
Not even.
But for you and I to become like true, sincere, diehard friends, we would have to go through a lot. I mean, there would have to be a lot of time that would go by. We would have a lot of different conversations about a lot of different things. We would, there would just have to be opportunities for us to prove to one another that we're both willing to what Seneca says, go into exile for one another, or die for one another, or put ourselves up as security for the other person, right? And there are just not a ton of people that are willing to do that for other people. And so the small circle of friends I have, I feel like we've all proven that to each other, and I feel like we're good. And it's really hard for me to allow someone else in, because it just takes a lot to get to that point.
Yeah, you definitely see that as you grow and get older. Maybe you're more tolerant, like in your 20s. You put up with shenanigans from people and supposed friends, but like later on in life, you're like, oh, no way would I, deal with that.
Yeah, your peace and your time are so important as you get old. I mean, they're important all the time, but as we're aging, we're noticing right now that our peace and our time are incredibly important. And if it's not, if it doesn't give me a heck yes vibe, as far as time goes, I don't want to commit. I don't want to invest time in it, and I don't want to give up my peace for something, So like, if I were to get recruited to go do a job that's going to be triple my income, I would really have to just look at all the different layers of the job. And if any part of that job is going to affect my peace, I'm going to say no. I'm just going to say no. Money is not more important to me than my peace.
Same with relationships. I did a talk a few weeks ago, and we talked about how like 50% of the population is choosing not to date and choosing not to get in relationships because, they just don't want to settle. And like you said, disrupt their peace. Is it even worth it at a certain point?
Yeah. That right there, what you just said, is it worth it? That is a key question that I bring up all the time with the people that I work with. Is this worth your anger? Is this worth your time? Is this worth your peace? Is this I don't know if I'm not gonna say a bad word here, but Mark Manson wrote the book The Subtle Art of Not Giving Enough. Yeah. And in that there are several Stoic principles in that book which I like. And I know Mark Manson and Ryan Holiday are kind of not necessarily friends, but they know each other. But in that book he talks about, you only have a limited number of F's to give in your life, and think about this situation. Like, let's say I only have 100 F's to give, and I'm 32 years old or whatever, right? I have 100 left. And you look at the situation, it's like, do I want to give this one of my 100? And then if you could just ask that sort of question, not necessarily that specific question, if you can have some other question in mind that you can ask, but if you have some sort of question to ask a situation like that, you'll find that a lot of things that you felt like needed to bother you actually will not bother you.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought up the point of time, because, TickTock closed the clock. And so in dealing with, the aging process and people wondering when they're going to die, and like how many more Father's Days am I going to be able to get, or whatever. What do the Stoics say as far as, like, I don't know, calming the soul about like time, aging, death that's going to happen to all of us?
Yeah, the big one's memento mori. As I said earlier, it's remember that you are going to die. Remember that we're all mortal, that we're all going to die at some point, right? And so again, for me, I feel like it's just always going to go back to, we're all going to die. We all have, a number of days that are set before us. And it's what we do in those days is what counts, is what matters, right? So, and it's kind of sad to think about that we're just going to not exist anymore, but we're existing right now. We're alive today. So what can we do right now? What can we do today, this week, this month, this year, that will bring fulfillment and meaning and purpose into our life, or the lives of those around us, or the lives of people that might be miles and miles away via the internet, So for me, again, Socratic way, what's interesting is that Socrates wasn't a Stoic. Stoicism wasn't around when Socrates was around, right? But my whole thing is around the Socratic quote of, the unexamined life is not worth living, right? And he said that in Plato's Apology, pretty close to before he died. So for me, it all goes right to that. So like, are you living an examined life? Are you asking yourself questions on a day-to-day basis, or even at least a couple times a week? Are you in the place that you want to be in right now? And if you are not, what are the things that you can do differently to get you in the place where you want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're all, like you said, the clock is ticking. We're getting closer and closer every day. Every single day we're dying, right? So there's no time to waste, really. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, if you want to do something, let's just go do it, right? You want to be responsible with finances and with your relationships with your family, things like that. Like if you want to, you know, like if someone wants to go climb Everest or whatever, like, would that make sense if your wife's pregnant back home and you know you're going to be gone for several months and she's going to be by herself? You know, there are things to consider like that, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But like the small things that you potentially can change today that you think might make a big difference, why not change them right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have to be careful with the materialism goal searching. If you think, you know, if I get that house, I'll be happier. If I get that car, I'll be happier. And then you get the car, you get the house, and you go back to square one. So yes, on the figure out what's going to make you happy, but be careful with the materialism side of that.
Yeah, and that makes me think of nexting too. I don't know if you've heard of nexting, where you're always thinking about the next thing in your life, or you're always looking forward to the future or whatever. And that's not what the Stoics are down with at all. If you look, all three of the main texts, like the Gospels of Stoicism, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Discourses and Selected Writings by Epictetus, and Letters from a Stoic from Seneca, all of them talk about living in the present as much as you can. Because when you're living in the past, you're dealing with depression. There's a quote about, I think there's Alastuey that said this, about the depression is living in the past, anxiety is living in the future, and peace is living right now, right? So all the Stoics talk about living right now. What can you do today that will make your life look the way you want it to look, right? But at the same time, you are living today, but tomorrow might not come. You might die tonight in your sleep, right? So are you okay with the day that you lived, at the end of the day, right before you go to sleep, knowing that it might be your last, right? And so for me, going back to what I was talking about with Socrates, it's just a constant state of just asking yourself questions and answering them in a truthful, authentic way.
I like that. Especially, you know, if you're going to think about living in the present, you also have to think about what decisions, choices I'm making today that's going to give me a better tomorrow. For example, you know, I'm going to go exercise today because I know I'll feel better, or I'll get a good night's sleep tonight. So in the past is done. It should be examined, like you talked about, to learn from, to grow from. But I also think, like you said, the present is all we have, and that's the gift that we have to focus on.
Yeah, and even when you go to work out today, this is your present. Like, you working out is a good thing for you, and it should make you feel good in the present moment in your life of the day, right? Not only will it help in the future, but like, if you can think of it still like right now, today, I know that what I'm doing right now is going to make me feel better after I do it. I'm going to feel better while I'm doing it. And then I'm going to feel better knowing that I'm setting myself up to feel better weeks and months from now. If I get those, if I live to next month or 2 months from now, that's great. But right now, I'm doing everything that I know that I should do to make my present life the one I want it to look, the way I want it to be.
Yes, yes. So let's talk about some of those things that people can do to really sharpen their intrapersonal self, you know, with exercise, journaling, therapy. Those are kind of like some of the top ones I would think about. But what else would you say that people could do to help themselves?
Yeah, so I actually wrote I think I wrote a blog post on this like several months ago. I'm trying to remember some of these while I'm talking. Journaling, you already said journaling. Journaling is one of the most important things you can do.
Can you say why? Can you explain why?
Yeah, because when you take the time to sit down and get in a solo kind of situation where you're by yourself and you have your little book or whatever, or if you're doing it on a computer, that's fine, and you are taking the time to literally write out your thoughts or write out some event of the day or whatever, it's putting you in a situation to reflect on that. And that's the most important thing you can do over the course of your day, or at least one time a day. Reflect on your day and reflect on moments that either were the highlight of your day or the low light, or did you have a day that was rather boring, right? And if so, are you okay with that day being boring? Right? So it just sets you up to have a conversation with yourself, is what I would say. That's the power of journaling. Have a conversation with yourself. And now some of us, I mean, I can go without journaling for several days because I'm willing to just talk to myself, basically. I'm willing to just have that kind of internal conversation with myself about how things went, you know? And I'm willing to also do that with my close, tight group of friends. And that's one thing I was going to say. So like, as far as dealing with things like that, it might make sense for you to have one person or two people that you can really just spill your guts to and really talk to about anything and
Mm-hmm.
everything that's going on, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I probably shouldn't have necessarily shared that example earlier about me in the classroom, and feeling like people should expect me to be in some other position or whatever, because that is kind of like a little quote unquote thorn in my side, or it was a thorn in my side a few months ago. But I felt like it made sense at that time to share that as an example of someone going through a situation like
Mm-hmm.
what you said. But if
Yeah.
I didn't do, but if I were to not do that, that's definitely something I would have done with a close friend. I would have had that conversation with them saying, hey, I feel like I may have made a mistake whenever I went to this ed tech startup. I worked at it at 8 months. I felt like things were going well, and then this thing happened. It just didn't feel like it was a fit for me. So then I felt like I needed to move on, and I took the first job that was available. Right? Me having that conversation with my friend who I trust, he then can kind of share his outside viewpoint of how it all went down and
Mm-hmm.
what his thoughts are. And his thoughts will come from a place of love and caring and
Yes.
compassion
Yes.
and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas someone that I don't know very well, if I
Mm-hmm.
were just to spill the beans to them, their angle on it would be considerably different from what my friend would say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of the things I said today in my trust TikTok with Seneca. Seneca said that if you trust everyone, if you trust every single person you meet, that's just as bad as trusting no one,
Mm-hmm.
because what you're saying is that what you have to share with everyone isn't as important as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
I try to only share important stuff, like the really important stuff, with my close tight group of friends, right?
Right.
I'm not in a situation where I don't trust anyone. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
trust my group, right?
Yeah.
And it takes a while for me to trust other people.
Well,
So
not everybody's privy to your personal life story.
right.
Not everybody deserves, a seat at the table for that. It has to be with trusted people.
Yeah, they have to earn it. I mean, it's going to sound arrogant, but like I feel like everyone has to earn anything that I give them, and just like I have to earn it for them. So like, if I want someone to trust me, if I want you to trust me, I have to earn it somehow. I have to do something for you to identify something in me that would suggest that you could trust me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's vice versa too. You have to do something to earn my trust, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's no point in us just divulging like very serious, sensitive matters about ourselves or about other people in our family or whatever, or about our finances or whatever, with someone that we don't trust, because the advice they give us or what they say to us might not be helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to be mindful of that on TikTok. I try to keep some of the things very general, very kind of broad and vague, for the viewer, for the audience, to have their own sort of experience with it. So
Mm-hmm.
like, whenever I talk about anger, I'm not going to say when you get angry about X. I just say when you get angry, you might notice that your body is responding a certain way, and you're starting to realize that you can't think very clearly. So do you feel like that's a good situation to put yourself in, or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't say, hey, when you get angry at your neighbor or your spouse or whatever. I try not to get too specific, because
Right.
everyone's living a different story.
Sure. Sure. So, what's some other things as far as like dealing with our interpersonal challenges? For example, I think, when I have like, you know, my own struggles, I think about, okay, how do I get out of this headspace? How do I get excited about something else in life? Maybe setting a goal or something like that.
Yeah. uh, there's a lot of ways to answer that. So let me pull it back to a foundation. So the foundation for me every day is a more fati, right? So this day is going to be different than yesterday. Something's going to happen today that's going to be different than yesterday, right? I don't know what it is yet, because I haven't lived out the day. But there is going to be something that's going to go on that might be interesting, that might be memorable in some way, right? And whatever that is, I'm going to embrace it. I'm just going to say, hey, this is something that it's I've been provided with this opportunity to reflect on, to deal with, to address, and I'm going to see if that makes my life better in some way, or if it makes me rethink a direction that I have for my life, right? So for me, at the beginning is a more fati. And then as the day goes on, I ask questions as things happen, like this thing that happened, this email that came through that feels like it's about me, but it's sent to everyone, right? I have to ask myself, is this email really about me? Like, am I the one that's in the wrong that set up this scenario for all of us to get this email?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and then preventing myself from getting into that kind of rabbit hole of like, did I not change the paper in the copier the right
Right.
way or whatever?
Don't
Did
take
I
it
break the copier?
personally.
Yeah. There's no reason for us to take every single thing personally, because there's no one really out there that's trying to snipe us all the time. And I think a lot of us are. That's a cognitive bias called the spotlight bias, where we feel like we're always spotlight effect, where we feel like we're always in the spotlight of everyone else's play, right? Where like when they're going about their day, when we walk in the room, we feel like they stop what they're doing and then they focus on us. And if we don't do something that's interesting or that is important to them or valuable to them, then we're failing them in some way, right? And getting out of that mind space or that headspace is one of the most important things you can do. Because I'm sorry that I'm bringing this up. I'm just dealing with a lot of people that deal with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, they feel like someone's always watching them, someone's always coming after them, someone's always out to get them, and that is so far from the truth.
Yeah, they're thinking about themselves more than they're ever going to be thinking about you.
Yes, 1,000%, and that's so true for like almost everything. People are, and I'm gonna sound kind of, again, I'm not trying to sound negative, but people are selfish. People think about themselves more than they think about other people most of the time, right? I live in a very small town, and if when you go to a four-way stop, you'll see some people say, go ahead, you can move it, and people are being kind and whatnot. And that's small examples of people thinking about other people, but like the big things that pertain to our emotions and what we think about on a daily basis, those aren't necessarily being considered by other people because they're considering their own stuff,
Yep. I always like pause if I get like I don't know, an angry email. I just try to reread it and think like, okay, maybe they're having a bad day. This isn't about me. Let me de-escalate. Let me, not take it personally. And then I often find when I respond in that way, they come back in a nicer tone.
Yeah. There's no point in getting worked up over something you can't control, because you can't control other people's emotions.
Right.
And if they get mad over something that really doesn't make sense, or if they get mad over something that didn't happen, that didn't exist, that's on them. It's on them, and you can only do what's in your control. And that's be polite, be courteous, do what you did, reflect on the situation and think about, what can I potentially do from my end to potentially stop this from festering or stop this from turning into a big deal without also stressing myself out about it.
Right. You want to create good karma. If you believe in that, or if you don't believe in that, I think there's an energy that takes place. And so what you put out is oftentimes what you get back.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about maybe just a little bit about, you mentioned your 3 favorite Stoics. For people who are watching that might not be familiar with them, can you touch a little bit about them and why you like them, and maybe some favorite sayings with them?
Yeah. So what's really cool about the what's the mountain called? Mount Rushmore. So what's really cool about the Mount Rushmore of the Stoics is that they're the top 3, the main 3 guys, are so different from one another. Okay, so there's Epictetus, who is probably my favorite. He lived as a slave in Rome for 30 years. And so, like being a slave in Rome was a bad deal, right? A bad situation. And then at the end of 30 years, whenever he was done, he went on to become a philosophy teacher, which is really cool. The other one is Seneca. And Seneca was an interesting figure. He was a couple heartbeats away from being Roman emperor whenever he lived. And he was actually an advisor to Nero for the first couple of years of Nero's reign, whenever things were kind of normal. And then Nero hated him, and he got exiled and all sorts of stuff. He also wrote plays, and he was a statesman. And then Marcus Aurelius, who was emperor, who was the philosophy king, or the philosopher king is what he came to be known. And so you have an emperor, you have a playwright and a senator, a politician kind of guy, and then you have a slave, right? So you have 3 different guys in 3 different kind of realms, right? And so of those, they have different kind of ways of thinking and ways of viewing life, right? What's important and what's not important. But you'll find across all 3 of them that there are very common themes. So what an emperor thinks is important, a slave also thought was important, right? What a politician thought was important, it would make sense that an emperor would think it was important, but also a slave found it important, right? And all the people within their schools and whatnot. And so one of my favorite sayings, one of the ones that got me in trouble on TikTok, or it went viral and it turned into this big kind of thing in the comments with people kind of fighting over it, was from Epictetus. It said, if someone, I'm not going to quote this exactly right, but it's along these lines. If someone is able to anger you with just their words, they become your master. And what that's suggesting is that if someone can make you mad by calling you a name or just starting a rumor about you, which I know sucks, but if they can get to you and push your buttons and trigger you to get you to think irrationally, to get you to think too emotionally, right? Just to get you to like not be yourself, they are stringing you along like a puppet, right? And so, and I only that TikTok was only like 7 or 8 seconds, but it was enough to like fuel some frustration and anger.
So what was the problem people were having with that?
So it happened right after the Will Smith Chris Rock slap.
Okay.
So yeah, so and I literally read it that morning of the Oscars. And for the viewers that you might have that don't remember that or whatever, Chris Rock made a joke about Will Smith's wife. Will Smith stood up at the Oscars, walked up on stage, and smacked him in the face and said, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth." So anyway, my quote, and again, I will admit, part of the reason why I posted that was it was relevant at the time, but also I really did think it was a really good line that morning when I read it, right? So I kind of understand what I was doing there a little bit, right? But that doesn't mean that it's not true. If someone can control you with what they say, then yeah, you are not where you necessarily need to be in your life, right?
I mean, it's a perfect example, actually.
Yeah, you know, it's ironic. Yeah.
Yeah, because
my words. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying my words from that TikTok made a lot of people mad in that whole thing.
Yeah, but it makes sense because Chris Rock was composed and calm. He didn't let him, you know, ruffle his feathers in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Of course, you know, Will Smith just went off like, you know, a firecracker. And so that definitely, you know, pertains or applies to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was like, I mean, that was indicative of other issues that have been going on for a long time in Will Smith's life, you know, like with his wife and that guy friend that they were in an entanglement or whatever, you know. There was a lot of backstory, which makes sense. But like that was the tipping point for him where someone's words got him to act outside of himself. He just wasn't himself for the 30 seconds that all went down, right? And that's a big thing that they all talk about, all the Stoics. Like whenever you're like really angry, you're just not yourself anymore. Seneca talked about a violent raving. So whenever you're overly angry, it's like a violent raving where you're overcome by passion and overcome by these emotions where you just can't see clearly anymore, right? So that was one. The other one that I took down. So, and I think this might be good for your viewers or listeners. This was a big reflection moment on my life. So I posted one in June, I think, June or July, that was from Marcus Aurelius. And the quote is, "If it's bearable, bear it. Stop complaining." So if it's bearable, bear it, stop complaining was the quote, right? So I said that, and all I added to it was, man, that's the truth, or that's right. That's hard to swallow, but that's right? But people took that so out of context. It got tens of thousands of views very quickly, and then all the stitches started coming in. So those of the viewers of yours that don't have TikTok, those of us that are content creators, when someone stitches our TikToks, that is a big notification for us. And when we look at our notifications, it's a big fat video right there. And there's no way, I don't want to say there's no way. It's hard for me to not want to watch those because I want to see what that person's doing. Because oftentimes it's good. Oftentimes they're like adding value to what I said, or they're reflecting out loud in front of their camera, you know, and it's a really cool thing, right? But the stitches that were coming with that were not what I wanted them to be at all. And they were like poisoning and misconstruing the message really hard, to where it got to the point where I felt like it made more sense to take that video down and then make a follow-up video kind of somewhat like explaining why I felt like I needed to take it down and apologizing to anyone that may have taken it out of context. Because I was getting stitches from people that were saying like, well, it would show me, you know, if it's bearable, bear it, you know, stop complaining or whatever. They'd show that, and then it would cut to them, and they're like, bro, no. Like, so you're just telling all the slaves in the 1800s that they just needed to bear slavery, you know? Or another person said, so the Jews just needed to bear the Holocaust, you know? Like, that's not in any way what I was trying to say. Slavery, Holocaust, genocide, these are unbearable things. These are unbearable, terrible things, right? But it was causing this big kind of like vacuum of people coming into those videos, and like,
it's more like if you broke your wrist, okay, bear it and don't complain. More like that.
Something small, small like that. And there was no reason to like blow it up like that. And a lot of those people were coming over to my TikTok, my other videos, and they were leaving troll comments and whatnot. And
Yeah.
it turned into this big thing. And I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? I'm done. And so
But that's a really good point, though, that some people might not get the Stoics. Like they just
for sure
can't get what they're trying to accomplish, which is a shame because
yeah.
I think there's so much value in what they have provided.
Yeah. People, I mean, for me, Stoicism really helps like center everything, and it helps me like keep things disciplined. You know, it just doesn't make sense for me to just like live in a way that is just completely selfish, completely self-centered,
Argumentative, combative.
Yeah,
just, you know, it's a sport now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Very, very good way to say that. Everything is so competitive. Conversations are competitive now. Like conversations that you can have with a person where they are trying to one up you or trying to, derail what you're trying to say to get it to something else or whatever. And I can see that can get irritating. Like that can make someone angry. And I understand that. But you want to get to the point where like when they're doing that, just recognize that they're doing it for a reason. That it potentially pertains to their ego, or it pertains to their self-perception. It pertains to them thinking that they're not important. And so they feel like they need to kind of like take the conversation and run with it this direction or whatever, or they're jealous of you or whatever. Everything that everyone does is their own stuff. It's their own issues, and it's coming out from some place inside that they either haven't dealt with, or they've tried to deal with it and they couldn't overcome it. Or maybe they don't even know it's there, right? And so the point of my whole YouTube, my whole TikTok, my Instagram, everything is to let's start thinking about what's going on inside intrapersonally and see how it's affecting our lives, either negatively or positively, and then try to live a more examined life.
What do they say about sense of humors? Having, to be able to laugh at yourself and...
Yeah. So Epictetus has a really good quote on that. Again, I'm not going to give it exactly because I'm not an encyclopedia at this point, but I do remember a lot of it.
Just the gist.
Yeah, he said that if someone comes to you and says that someone's speaking ill of you, like they're making fun of you behind your back, or they're making up rumors or whatever, and they say a certain thing, they say X or whatever, what you should say then is, well, if they only know X, God, what does he say? He's like, it's good that they only know X. Imagine if they knew Y and Z and A, B, C, all these different things about my life, right? So it's like they're willing to be like really open and honest about different things that might provide a valuable lesson to others, right? I think there's a common misunderstanding that Stoics are just always like put together and just like, they never smile, they never enjoy life or whatever. But if you really read what they're talking about, like they talk about, Marcus Aurelius talks about enjoying the furrowed brow of like a lion, enjoying like scenery, enjoying leaves, like enjoying, kissing your children goodnight, before they go to bed or whatever. There's a lot of joy. Yeah, there's a lot of joy that can be found throughout the Stoics. And as far as like making jokes and whatnot, I can't think of a good example right now, but I think joy is somewhat connected to that.
Sure, absolutely.
Because if you're making jokes, you're probably in a decent mood, right?
Yeah, you're in a lighter state, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so those were the three, your three favorite Stoics and a little bit about them. So that was really cool. So we're kind of getting here to the end. So would you like to share any last final thoughts on maybe just, encouraging people, especially with their interpersonal challenges?
Yeah. So for me, I'm not what's the best way to say this? I always want to be careful about how I say things, especially if it's going to be online. For me, I think the most important thing that we can do is live an examined life, as I've mentioned before. And what an examined life looks like is one where you are thinking about the various things that go on during your day, right? And the most important thing, in my opinion, that we don't do, especially if we want to reach goals, if we want to make a difference, if we want to impact the lives of others, is live a life that's on autopilot, where we just go about our day, we do our 9 to 5, we go get McDonald's, we come home and we watch TV, and then we go to bed, right? That's not necessarily why you're here. Now, it's not up to me to tell you why you're here, but I will suggest that you have a why, and living that way, living on autopilot, is suggesting you're basically telling yourself that you might not know what your why is, or B, you're afraid of your why, or C, you're not wanting to embark on the journey that it takes, the hardships and the boulder rolling and all that, to figure out what your why is, right? And so I'm out here. Socrates called himself a gadfly, which is kind of like the bothering fly that's always messing with you, right? That's what I'm trying to do on TikTok and YouTube. I'm just trying to bother people a little bit, just try to poke at them, get them to think about why they're living the way they're living, why they're believing what they're believing, why they're thinking what they're thinking, why they're saying what they're saying, and why they're doing what they're doing. And I think if I can get more people, or a lot of people, to really consider all these things, they can then start tapping into what they really want to do with their lives.
Yeah, you want to be thriving, not just surviving.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Most
exactly.
definitely. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on my channel today. It was super helpful. I really like what you're doing, and I'll keep following you on social media. And I hope other people come to your channel and get that encouragement, because it is so needed in today's society.
Yeah, we need more lighthouses, and I appreciate you for being a lighthouse as well. And thank you for having me on. And I wish you all the best with your channels.
Oh, thank you so much. And if you guys like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be alerted to when the next video drops. Thanks for watching.